We're really excited to have the Oscar-winning producer and co-writer with us tonight, Diana Ossana. And I'd like to bring her up, and we're going to talk about the legacy of Brokeback in year 20. Here she is, Diana Ossana. She's coming on up. Hi, Diana. Here she is. She's back at the Loft. Yes.
Thanks, Jeff.
Well, Diana, 20 years, Brokeback.
Oh boy.
Who could believe it?
Well, for me, it's been almost 30. I read the story in '97.
Wow.
Yeah, and it took all those years to get it made.
So you've been doing a lot of press this month for the movie. I'm wondering, as you've been revisiting for the 20th, or for you the 30th, but really for the rest of us the 20th anniversary, how have you been sort of embracing the legacy? I remember we did a 10th anniversary screening of Brokeback here in 2015, and at the time I remember you mentioned that it was very difficult to watch because of Heath Ledger.
Yes.
And I'm wondering how you feel about the film now.
I made myself watch it a couple of years ago all the way through again, and was happy that I did it because I still think it's a wonderful movie. I mean, of course I'm biased, but seeing Heath up on the screen, I was able to do it, and it was sad and difficult still because it brings I was on set the whole time, and I saw all the scenes being filmed, and Heath talked to me a lot about, he was getting advice from me about the character and so forth, and he was, in a way, he was like my son. I became very close to the young people that were in the film, so it was a wonderful thing for me to be able to watch it again. I think the film is even more important now than it was when it first premiered. When Larry and I set out to write the script, we were never preachy people, I guess is the best way to put it, because I don't want to be preached to. I want to form my own opinions and points of view, but I want to expose myself to enough information that I'll be informed, make informed decisions and opinions. And we just set out to write the most convincing story and characters that we could for this film. And I think we did a really good job with that. We had to expand the story because the story just had mentions here and there of like the wives and the children. But, rural homophobia, the ripple effect of that we felt was important to emphasize in writing the film. And, how culture is. It cycles. It goes up and down and up and down. And I think we're going into a down cycle now. And I just feel like these kind of stories that are filled with what we considered really compelling characters, even though they were ordinary people, people that we could connect to and relate to and come to feel something about, are just more important than ever.
Yeah, and I just wanted to give a shout out to Larry McMurtry, who's no longer with us. Recently,
Larry.
Maybe like in 2021, did he pass away?
March of 2021, Larry passed away.
Yeah, what a talent! What an amazing
I
talent.
miss him every day. Every day.
Yep. And speaking of kind of looking at the reception of the film back then, in the press that you've been doing this month for the film, I noticed that everyone's asking you about the Oscar. So this is a great story. If there's any list by a critic who lists the top 10 worst Oscar Best Picture mistakes, this is always ranked number 1 or number 2. It's Raging Bull not winning over Ordinary People in 1980, and then Brokeback not winning the Best Picture Oscar in 2006, over Crash winning. I know. But there's a specific reason that you've been talking about how you knew why that was. Could you talk
Sure,
about that?
and I mentioned this recently in an interview with the New York Times, and it went viral. It's everywhere. And I just found it amusing. And I wonder if I'll hear from Clint Eastwood at some point about it. But, let me preface it with this. I'm not bitter at all about the Oscars. I mean, I'm thrilled that we won the Oscar for the screenplay. I would have been thrilled to win for the picture, but more for the people that worked on the film, for the entire crew and all of the actors, because everybody worked so hard and they were so committed to that script and that story. So it was about 2 weeks before the Oscars in 2006, and Paul Haggis had a party at his home for all of the Oscar nominees, and I was invited. And I took my friend Mark Poirier with me because Mark was the person who'd given me the short story to read originally. And we got there, and Clint Eastwood was there. Steven Spielberg was there, but I had met him before, so that was not a big deal. But Clint Eastwood, I've always been a fan of his, a huge fan. And I was a particular fan of his film Unforgiven because it took the Western and stood it on its head in terms of the anti-hero. I just thought it was a brilliant movie, and I was so excited at the idea of meeting him. And so Paul's walking me over to meet him, and he said, "Diana, I have to tell you, he hasn't seen your film." And the votes were already in for the Oscars, and it was like somebody punched me in the stomach, because that's when I knew. I mean, if a filmmaker like Clint Eastwood hadn't seen this movie that had been so hyped and had won all these awards and was so, controversial, how many other people hadn't seen it? And so I just knew. I knew it. And I said that afterwards. Mark and I left. I didn't even meet him. I mean, I don't know why the article doesn't say that. I didn't meet him because I stopped right there, and I thought, I can't meet this man. What kind of a filmmaker doesn't watch all the movies and then votes? I'm sure there are a lot of people in Hollywood that don't. There are a lot of films. But Larry used to describe me. He said, Diana's a completist. She has to watch everything, and because I know how hard it is to make a film. It's just as hard to make a bad movie as it is a good movie. So you want to give credit to the folks that have done all this hard work. So I looked at Mark and I said, "Let's get out of here." And Paul was embarrassed. He's almost like, "I wish I hadn't told you that." Well, I'm glad you did, So that was, and that statement has gone. It's everywhere now.
Have you watched any Clint Eastwood films since then? Or is that it? Are you done?
No, I really haven't.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. So since we're in the midst of Pride Month, I'm just curious. There was a lot of talk at the time that was Brokeback losing the Oscar, and I know it wasn't just Clint Eastwood. I remember Ernest Borgnine was saying that he didn't watch it, and Tony Curtis was saying he didn't watch it because it wasn't a movie that they wanted to support. In theory, perhaps. Do you feel like homophobia had a lot or something to do with that?
Well, anybody with a brain would see that. I don't see how it could have been anything else. We'd won everything up until then, and then all of a sudden we didn't. Yeah. And I was Tom Hanks was at the Oscars, and Tom gave Ang, I think, his Oscar. And when we got our Oscars, we were backstage, and Tom was back there, and he said, "I'm going to leave, Diana." And I said, "Aren't you going to stay for the picture Oscar?" And he goes, "Oh, you're going to win. I don't need to stay," right? And I didn't say anything. So the next day, Larry and I were at the hotel, and Tom called us. And he said, "I can't believe it." He said, "I was listening on the radio on the way home, and I heard." He said, "I was stunned. I'm still stunned." So.
And this movie, I just find this movie fascinating on a lot of levels, but I'm fascinated by the fact that this was not just a movie. This was a cultural phenomenon. If if those of you who remember it when it came out, it was talked about everywhere. It was joked about on late night talk shows. It was parodied on Saturday Night Live. It was called the Gay Cowboy Movie that by people who hadn't seen it, perhaps.
It still is. People that haven't seen it still call it that.
Yeah, but it really kind of like hit the mainstream in a way that we hadn't seen a gay romance do before on that level. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what was going on, you think, in 2005 that sort of cleared the path for this film. Because there were a number of other films that year, like Capote, Breakfast in Pluto, Transamerica. There were some big commercial mainstream LGBTQ films, and I'm wondering what was going on that year, do you think?
You know, the culture was, I guess, ready to see something new and different. And not just the culture, but, you know, the powers that be and the people that finance these things. So, you know, there was an opening in the culture. And so we had all these great films. And, you know, it was interesting. In 2015, when Larry was invited to the White House to have the Obamas give him the National Humanities Medal for his body of work. And so Larry went, I went, Faye, Larry's wife, and my daughter Sarah, we all went. And, you know, it was Obama that got gay marriage passed, essentially. And, you know, when we got there and we were, meeting them, and Michelle said to me, Diana, I am so happy that we can give Larry this award while we're still in office. And with you, you know, and they mentioned Brokeback, you know, and how compelling that was for them. I think that, and it hadn't even, you know, maybe I'm dense, I don't know, but it hadn't occurred to me how it had changed the conversation that much that people were actually thinking that this is something that could really happen. And I started getting, when gay marriage passed, I started getting messages and letters from people about it, you know, thanking me. And I was like, my goodness, you know, that's if I help with that, hooray. You know, I'm proud, so.
Yeah, well, you know, it played at art houses like the Loft Cinema, where it played here for many, many, many months. But it also played in mall multiplexes in the Midwest. I mean, it played everywhere, which is really important for representation to be sort of widespread like that, so everybody sees it. And that was also a time of a monoculture when everyone was kind of consuming the same products. And was that sort of by design? Focus Features, did they talk about that, like how they thought it was going to be a mainstream film?
No. What Mr. Seamus, who was the head of the studio at the time, and he was also signed on as a producer on the film, they wanted to market it to women. So I don't know if you saw some of the posters that were out where, you know, Jack's holding a baby and Lorene's behind him and that kind of thing. And I tried to say, you know, I don't think you need to worry about that. This is the this is the kind of film that this is a word of mouth film. When people start seeing this, once they get exposed to this narrative and this story, they're going to feel the same way I did when I read it. You know, the night I read it, all I could think about is I want to tell people about this. I want other people to experience what I experienced reading the story, feel the same feelings I felt, and how it tapped into my own well of sadness and grief and regret and compassion, that's my byword now about the film. If I describe it with one word, the word is compassion, because that's what it stimulates and elevates in people. You know, they may not feel that or realize that at first. I've had so many different responses from folks. I had someone tell me, you know, when I first saw the film, Diana, I left the theater and I was like, what's the big deal? And then I was sitting at my desk a week later and started sobbing and not realizing, and then all of a sudden it came to me, it was that movie. So its power is potent and it's evergreen. It will always be affecting. And look, it's 20 years later, and people are still going to see it, you know? I think it's a classic film. I think it will be. It makes me very happy. I feel lucky and fortunate that I had anything to do with it, let alone being the relentless maniac that I am to get it made. And to get it made, you know, the best way, the most honest way possible. That was the most important thing to me.
Well, I mean, what a gift you gave the world with this film. I'm curious how you look at the 20 years that have passed in terms of representation. I remember there was a lot of talk at the time that this movie was going to open the floodgates for Hollywood depictions of gay stories and themes and characters. Do you think? I mean, I don't think it happened, but do you? I don't think it happened. But what do you think?
No.
Just curious.
No, it didn't.
Curious.
But, you know, you can't give up. And again, it's a matter of exposure. People have to see this film to maybe start to have a different mindset about people's lives unlike their own, which I'm totally interested in myself. I'm so curious. I'm terribly nosy. And, you know, I think this is one of the reasons this film is still very important. You know, if for no other reason that, you know, people will have preconceived notions, and they did before they went in to see the film, you know, even back then. And they do now if they've never seen it before. It's that gay cowboy movie, which it isn't. But, you know, they hear it's, you know, just about buggery. Well, no, it's not. And, you know, just all these different preconceived notions. And I have all these great little vignettes. I had these, a lot of my friends, I have a wide variety of friends. I had some military folks, guys that I'm really good friends with. And because they were my dear friends, they went to see the film, right? And the one man who I adore, him and his wife, they got a bunch of kids, and they're just lovely people. He called me up and he said, "Diana, I'm so proud to be your friend." He said, "You did a great job." He said, "You know what I learned?" He said, "I learned that when gay people fall in love, they feel the same way as anybody that falls in love." And I was shocked. That shocked me. But, you know, just hearing that from somebody who I knew, who was perfectly sane, but maybe a little sheltered, you know, didn't know that. To bring that kind of an awareness to someone, that's the kind of thing that inspires tolerance, don't you think? Yep. I mean, that's what we need more of, and boy, do we need it more than ever now. Yep. I mean, I spend the majority of my days angry now. I'm just angry, and maybe that's keeping me alive, or you know, will keep me. I don't know, but yeah, I just feel like this film, you know, it's even more important than it was in 2005 and 2006.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the promise that this film seemed to indicate was that things were going to get better, and then, you know, here we are. So it is even more important now, I think, kind of in where we thought we were going and where we're actually at. And I want to open it up to the audience, but I just want to ask you this question because I'm very fascinated by this. So this film came out in 2005, and things have changed a lot in terms of who gets to make films and tell stories. There's a lot more opportunities for queer filmmakers and actors. Do you think this film would be made the same way if it were made in 2025 in terms of Ang Lee being a straight director and having straight identifying actors?
Well, you know, that's such a difficult question. In 1997, after we wrote the script, 3 months later, we sent it out in the world, and within 5 days, Gus Van Sant was in Dallas. I had to go drive and pick him up because he wanted to make the film, a gay director, right? Gus couldn't get actors to commit. So, you know, we had to just keep going. And you know, I think there are more actors now who have are openly gay or have come out as gay, and so there's a larger pool of actors. But back then, it would never have dawned on me, and it actually wouldn't dawn on me to do this today, to ask someone their sexual orientation if they came in for an audition. You audition for a film based upon the character that you're going to play, not who you are, because you have to convince the audience and the director, whoever's auditioning you, that you're right for the role. I would have been thrilled to audition somebody who was gay and great in the role if they were available, but we couldn't get anybody. You know, I mean, we had. I had to keep thinking to myself, and this is what Larry said. He said, she's eccentric in her relentlessness, talking about me, that we would find smart actors that would see the value in playing these roles and what it would mean to them, not just as actors, but as human beings, right? And it was my daughter that suggested I look at some of Heath's movies, and I didn't realize at the time that Heath had played a gay teenager in a soap opera in Australia. And we had talked about this a little bit. I said, I think it's going to take an actor outside of America to take on these roles. People that are not afraid or not so constrained by their own homophobia. And we were so lucky to get Heath. I wanted him desperately after I saw these movies. I was like, this young man. And then Larry saw Monsters Ball, and up until the point where the young man kills himself and he stood up, he said, I can't watch this anymore. This is too brutal. He said, but that young man is Ennis. And I was like, yes. So, I don't know. You talk to people in Hollywood, or you talk to casting directors in Hollywood, and they might say, we would have to hire gay people to play these roles. Well, I don't know that that's necessarily true, but, or not. I don't know. But this I know. If I were auditioning, I would want the best actor I could get for the role. Now, as time has passed and people have asked me these questions, I think at the time, I was thinking about the actors. Annie was 21. Michelle was 22, I think, or 23. Heath was about to turn 25, and Jake was 24. I think the fact that the two young men were straight, or reasonably straight, and by the way, I think that sexuality is a spectrum. And we're all on the spectrum, right? That there are people who are completely straight, and there are people who are completely gay, and there's all the rest of us in between. So, it's not a judgment I want to make or an opinion I want to express about somebody. That's their business. But I think that kind of tension helped to inform their own conflicts as the characters, as they were playing the parts. But those guys were, I have to tell you, they were so committed. Oh my God. They just, if anything, the only thing that Heath doubted was that he was going to do the role justice. They were so committed, and they just dove right in, and they did what needed to be done to play those roles and be those people. So, I just think that it was meant to be, although I don't believe in those things, but I believe the world is chaotic. But we were just so lucky to get those people at the time.
Yeah, I've heard talk, you always hear talk on the internet about remakes of things and, remake of this. The alchemy between these two actors could not be replicated, so there's no point, I don't think, because it's such a great kind of dynamic.
Well, and I was on the set, and there were some things that would have gotten on film unless I had put my foot down, right? And I've told this story before. You probably remember it, Jeff, but the scene where they come down from the mountain and they're saying goodbye to each other in the pickup, and you're going to come up here again next year. Yeah, if the Army don't get me. And Ennis says, me and Alma were getting married or whatever. Well, when we blocked the scene, Aang said to Heath, when the scene gets played out, he says, now, before you say goodbye, you hug him. You hug Jake. And the look on my face, I think it's not written like that in the script, but Heath turned around and saw my face, and they're, rearranging and getting everything set up, and he came over to me, he goes, what's wrong? I said, they're on the flats now. They're back in the real world. He would never hug him on the flats and in town. He just wouldn't do that. He's about to be overcome by parting from this young man and not even realizing the depth of the feeling he's going to have and how it's going to impact him. But what he does know in his own, self-inflicted homophobia, that he doesn't want to admit that he's in love with this guy or that he might be gay. He says, well, tell Aang. I said, he's not going to listen to me. He goes, don't worry, I'll handle it. So they did the first take, and he picks up his little bag of goods and starts to walk off. And Aang yells, cut. And he goes up to Heath. He goes, how come you not hug him? And Heath said, I let the distance between us be the hug, which was made no sense, but it was brilliant, right? But that was how committed he was and how smart he was as an actor. So, these tiny little things, you got to be so careful, because if they get on film, they'll get in the film. And those tiny little missteps are cumulative when you're making a film. So that's just one of the reasons I was a maniac and had to be there the whole time, just to watch. And I'd never gotten Aang's way or any of that, and I never took the proactive part of going up and talking to the actors, but I let them come to me when they had questions, and they had lots of questions. So,
well, thank you for being a maniacal producer, because that's kind of what you have to do to get a film like this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have time for a couple of questions, and Ethan has a microphone here. Does anyone have a question for Diana? Here's someone over here.
Hey, thank you. It's one of my favorite movies ever made, so thank you for making it. And I think the Annie Proulx short story is just like sparse and a masterpiece. And I think that this is one of the best pieces of adapting screenwriting I've ever experienced, because that story is so sparse and you add things to it, but then you read the story and watch the movie and it feels like it's all the same. So I'm just curious, what was the experience writing that with Larry McMurtry? What did that look like?
Well, Larry and I, we sat down and we wrote the scenes that were within the story first. We wrote all those first, right? And then we went back and went, now wait a minute, we need a whole bunch more stuff here. So then we went back and we picked out scenes that we expanded. I don't want to spoil the movie for anybody that hasn't seen it, but there's the scene where Jack shows up and he thinks that they're going to be together, and finds out that they're not, and he leaves or whatever. But that was like just 2 sentences in the story, and we made it a 4-page scene. We talked about the women, and we had some arguments. One specific one was about, there's a Thanksgiving scene. By the way, before I go on, how many people have seen the movie already? Good God. How many people have never seen the film? Wow. I'm pretty excited for y'all to see it. Anyway, there's a Thanksgiving scene in the film, and the folks that have seen it will know what I'm talking about. But Larry and I went back and forth a little bit, and I got my way. But you've seen it, Jeff, so you know where Jack gets up and he gets in the face of the stud duck. In the original scene, that didn't happen, and Larry kept arguing with me, and I said, Larry, And I finally got him to understand the reason why it had to be different than we had originally written it. And then he said, you're right, just do it. So, but all of that, it just felt so natural. And because the story is so unsentimental and raw, and I was thinking about this too, and you'll see this when you see the film, the folks that haven't seen it yet. That spareness and rawness and that's not manipulating at all. All of that leaves a lot of open space for your emotional responses to the story. So you will fill that with whatever you have inside you as you watch this movie and after you leave. I mean, that to me was really important, that we not violate that when we were writing the script, that we kept it spare and open for the audience to receive or experience whatever emotions they would bring. I mean, when you go to a film, you view it through the lens of your own experiences or lack of them. And with this film, because, a lot of people that saw it are not gay. They're, or they are closeted, or, whatever the situation. But they leave the film, I think, feeling changed. And that was very important to me as in adapting this and in producing the movie and being on the set. The kids would sometimes, Jake in particular, would ask me a lot of times for explanations. Well, why did he do this and why didn't he do this? And about the character and why isn't he? And I would have to give him the backstory, which I had created in my own brain from reading the story. And I had backstories for all the characters, for all the young folks, because I knew, because they were so young just in their lives, that there was a lot emotionally that they might not understand or grasp right away. But because they were all so smart and such good actors, they would come to figure it out with a little pushing or just a little more information. So, there you go.
She made it sound easy. Not so easy, I think. Do we have a question back there, Ethan? Yeah.
Hi, Diana. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for being here.
Well, honored. I'm not sure if anyone has told you, but the great news that you're walking into in this theater recently is that the workers here have started a union.
Well, I love that.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say, if you may agree, Jeff, there's initially some hesitation, some trepidation perhaps from management, but to their credit, they accepted the union, and it's a great thing. And they're about to start negotiations, to my knowledge. But I wondered if you could, Diana, bring some context of the industry in here a bit, like if you've had favorable experience in unions. You talk a little bit about what's the relation to allowing you to do your creative labor and bring films like this to the screen in relation to workers making this place run. And
well, the Writers Guild. I'm in the Writers Guild, which is a major union. And it's, and I'm also in the Producers Guild. But the Writers Guild has been wonderful. When Larry and I were writing together, sometimes production companies don't pay you. It doesn't matter how famous you are. I mean, look, people like Tom Hanks have had to audit studios to get paid. So that's one of the biggest reasons that I think unions are a wonderful thing. They represent the worker bees, and we're the ones that keep things moving and keep things going. And what would they do without writers? So, yep.
Well, it sounds like they think they can do without writers.
Oh, yes, it's true.
We're learning that they
Yes.
don't think they need writers. So, yeah, scary time. Do we have another question? Yeah, there we go.
Hello.
Hello.
So this is my first time ever seeing this movie, actually.
Wow.
And I work in the creative field, and I aspire to do just media and make things that I love. And a part of my process, whenever I'm writing something or making something, I notice that the finished result, my favorite part most of the time, isn't what I thought it was going to be, especially with like how the audience perceives it. It's not their favorite part, what mine is. So for you, for the entire movie, what is your favorite part, favorite line, favorite scene? What makes this movie for you?
Oh my. Well, there's a scene in the film, and you might think I'm crazy, but whenever I see the movie, I cry. Or even when I read my script again, I cry. And it's a scene, and I'll just tell you, because you haven't seen it, it's a scene that involves shirts. That's all I'll tell you. And I think
she's crying even thinking about it.
you'll understand when you see this scene in the film. And I must tell you that for Heath, it was probably the most difficult emotional scenes for him as well, which I don't, there are things I like to tell you that I can't. So just know that when you see the shirts.
Yeah. That scene I think of as one of the most iconic scenes in a movie in the last several decades. I mean, it's great because you only have to mention it and people start welling up. It's brilliant.
And there's, Heath had his own creative input into that. I can't tell you, though. I can't tell you. I can't tell you.
No. Yeah. Was that okay? I don't know if you want to take credit for this, but whose idea was that scene in terms of the writing, in terms of you and Larry?
Oh, look, Larry. When we wrote the scenes in the script, we did them pretty sparsely. And Larry, this was Larry's whole MO when we started writing scripts together. The first draft we do together, and then he left the rest of it up to me. And then because he would get bored, fat. I mean, he had the attention span of a gnat, but he read everything and gave me notes. But there's something that happens in that scene that Heath did on the fly, and that's all I can tell you.
Okay. Yes. Enough said. I know what it is, but people will find out. I have time for 2 more questions. Do we have another question? Anyone? Yeah, here's one.
Hi, thank you for being here. In the movie, when you were writing, I don't know much about screenwriting, but you wrote the dialogue. How much freedom did the actors have to ad-lib certain parts of the film?
None. And I will tell you, Jake and Heath, just as the young men that they were Heath. Heath stuck to that script, religiously. Every take, Jake would do something different. He would do something a little different, and there was a sequence of scenes. There's a scene when they're out in the middle of nowhere and they're older, and there's the line that I think you all have heard. I wish I knew how to quit you. When we did that scene, it took an entire day. But at any rate, and you'll see it in the movie, Jake kept changing and Heath got so mad. He's like, and they started, he got so tense and he was bickering, and then he said something to Aang, and then Aang's like, oh God. So, but at any rate, Heath he stuck to that script like glue, because he said to me the first day I met him, he said, this is the most beautiful script I've ever read in my life. He said, I'm so happy to be here. So, I mean, there are a lot of actors that like to ad-lib, I guess, or they think they're smart enough to do that. And some maybe are. But, if you've got a script that's that good, why would you want to change any of it? You know?
Good point. Maybe there are smart actors out there who can. I don't know. Do we have one more question? Oh, you got it.
So, to that end, how did they feel about producing these? How did they feel with these scenes? Like, did you talk to them about that at the end of the day? Like, what?
Well, which scenes in particular?
Any of them? Like these? How did the movie affect them?
I think that you can see that in their later films. And there was, at one point, I can tell you this story because it doesn't affect what you'll see in the film. About halfway through the shoot, because once Aang starts shooting, and all actors I think that have worked with him will say this, he doesn't talk to the actors anymore. Once they start filming, you know, he expects them to show up and work, do, you know, and be ready. And for people this young and for a film and story this intense and complex and layered, it was difficult for these young people. So I was getting a lot of questions and all of this from them. But about halfway through, one afternoon we were wrapping up for the day, and Heath came to me and he was furious. He said, "I can't do this anymore." I said, "What?" He said, "You know, when we started filming, I thought Aang was leaving me alone because my character is solitary and he doesn't talk and all this." He says, "But I just realized he's a prick." And I was like, "Oh no, this can't be happening." So he said, "I just can't do this anymore." And I said, "Okay, honey, why don't you go to the, back to the motel and go to bed and get a good night's sleep, and we'll talk tomorrow, right?" So I went back to my room, and I wrote him a letter, rather long letter, explaining to him, I understand if you need to leave, that you need to leave, and we'll accept that. But here are all the reasons that you need to think about sticking around. So I gave him a list of things, like how it would inform him as an actor, how it would make his entire life richer, having played this role, the awarenesses that would come about for him as a man and as a human being, and how it would inform his acting career going forward and his personal life. I was desperate, you can imagine, because I was like, my God, because he was so perfect. He was this character. He was Ennis, and I didn't even think of him as Heath anymore, So the next day I gave him the letter, and he took it back, back to his room that night. And the next morning, I was in my chair, and I was sitting there, and I felt these arms come around my neck, and he hugged me, and he goes, "Diana, your letter made me cry. I'm not going anywhere." So that was, talk about a relief. Anyway.
And I just wanted to give a shout out to the women in the film.
Absolutely.
Michelle Williams and Anne Hathaway.
Yes.
Linda Cardellini's great.
Oh my God, yes.
I think the female roles in this film are challenging in a different way because they're not the focus, and they're sort of dealing with the kind of the impact of what's happening with the two men.
They're so important, though, because it gives you the context of their entire lives and the context of homophobia and its ripple effect, like I said earlier.
Yeah, all of them great. Michelle was nominated for an Oscar for that. Really, really great. So we're kind of wrapping up because we want to watch this movie. We want to get back into the 20th anniversary.
I want
of
everybody
Brokeback
to watch
Mountain. So Dan, I just want to kind of wrap up by saying a lot of producers produce great films, but few producers produce films that actually change the world, I think. And I'm wondering, being modest as you are, what do you think is your legacy as a producer for making this film, in terms of the way it sort of changed people's perspective on gay people and relationships and just their perspective on the world?
Well, as I said earlier, I feel extremely fortunate to have come upon this story and have had anything to do with getting it out into the world. I look at it and see it now just the same way the audience does. Because once it goes out into the world, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the world. And I feel like I couldn't be prouder of this film. The only thing I'm more proud of are my children. And I feel very proud to have had anything to do with it, to have had a hand in it. But it did exactly what I hoped it would, in a much bigger way than I thought it would. But, I wanted it to affect people. I wanted to get it out into the world in a major way. And I felt like a film was the best way to do it. And, that's why I demanded Larry read the story after I read it. He didn't want to read it because I don't read short fiction. What do you mean? I can't write it. I don't read it. I said, that's the dumbest reason I've ever heard. You're going to read this before you leave the house. But at any rate, I just feel like, to have made a difference in the way that people view other human beings. Like I said, the one word for this film in my heart and mind is compassion. And there's so little of that in the world at any given time, particularly now. And I feel like that's the legacy. If it makes you feel something, or makes you view the world or people around you in a better way, in a not negative way, in a not a mean-spirited way, if it makes you see that we're all connected, when it comes down to it, whether you like it or not, whether you believe it or not, as human beings, we are all connected. That's just the reality.
That's it. That's true. Thank you, Diana, for coming here. Please enjoy Brokeback Mountain. Those of you who haven't seen it, you're in for a very big treat on 35 millimeter. It's going to be beautiful.